In the outer rings of the Triarchus cluster, where empires rose and fell like the tides of forgotten stars, the warlords watched a pale blue planet with increasing interest. Earth, unassuming, unspectacular by galactic standards, had somehow resisted incursion, not through sheer strength or technological might, but by something stranger. Reports were inconsistent. Whole squads of genetically enhanced soldiers had vanished without trace. Drones returned fragmented data, blurred flashes of jungle, ruined buildings, a figure never quite caught in frame. To the warlords of Celestial Fracture, it was an insult. Each warlord, in their pride, sent a hunter. They were the elite, living weapons forged in the crucibles of conquest. There was Kareth, of the Vorkali clade, whose optic tendrils could see the electromagnetic whispers a heart's hesitation. Urash Ten, bred in the basalt wombs of Shahal, whose blood was laced with liquid metal and who had never failed to extract a target. And Xar, silent and cloaked in psionic armor, a predator whose kills were often felt before they were seen. They came in sleek drop ships that sliced through Earth's atmosphere like silver blades. From orbit, Earth was mapped, sectioned, and deemed archaic. Cities lay in ruin, dotted with the blackened skeletons of skyscrapers and silent highways. Humanity, battered from prior planetary invasions and internal collapse, had scattered. Military infrastructure was shattered. No orbital defense remained. The planet was ripe, too ripe. They began in the northern hemisphere, moving with algorithmic precision. Cities fell quickly, though, strangely, many were already abandoned. Resistance was minimal. Then, as they swept southward, the first anomaly occurred. Urash 10's signal vanished. His telemetry spiked for a second, heat pressure, a microsecond pulse of kinetic energy, and then silence. The others dismissed it. Earth was filled with hazards, mines, collapsing structures, biochemical decay. But then Kareth fell. His death was slower, recorded by a proximity drone. A single projectile, fired from 2 kilometers away, pierced his central cortex node. No warning, no trace. A kill with surgical efficiency. Xar paused. This was no coincidence. He dispatched 2 scouting hounds, semi-autonomous constructs built to detect neural patterns across vegetation and rock. They returned mangled, burned circuitry, precision cuts through their carbon plating. The remaining hunters activated full combat protocols. Satellites were deployed. Air patrols intensified. They combed the terrain inch by inch, scanning every heat signature, analyzing wind patterns for traces of movement. Nothing, only whispers, shadows, and eerie, deliberate silence. That was when the name emerged, first through intercepted transmissions from Earth's surviving gorilla cells, then scrawled on shattered concrete in red paint. Vance. No one knew who he was. No records matched the name in global databases. But wherever the name appeared, so did the corpses of hunters, always killed with a single shot. No energy discharge, no plasma burns, just a single primitive high-velocity round that bypassed shields and implants alike. It made no sense. Vance, it turned out, was a ghost from Earth's own wars. A sniper from a time before orbitals and antimatter lances. A man trained to kill with patience, steel nerves, and a rifle that required gravity, wind, and breath to master. When the world crumbled, he stayed behind, not out of loyalty, but because war had made him part of the terrain. He had become something more than a soldier. He had become a predator. The hunters escalated. They brought in seismic drones, swept with ultrasonic nets, flooded ravines with thermobaric pulses. Still, they lost more. Some vanished. Others were found with their optical arrays destroyed and limbs rearranged into warning signs. And Vance remained unseen. The warlords, watching from their distant thrones, began to argue. Some believed it was an earth deity, perhaps the final vengeance of a dying species. Others believed the planet itself was cursed or infected with some form of sentient virus. But the hunters knew better. This was a sniper, a human, and he was hunting them. Then came the message, broadcast on every hunter's comms channel in perfect galactic common, transmitted with local encryption protocols that should have been impossible for Earth tech to crack. You are not welcome here. This is not your ground. Turn back, or I keep killing. It was signed, Staff Sergeant C. Vance, 3rd Recon, Earth Defense. For the first time, Xar hesitated. He stood alone now, high above a desolate mountain range, his adaptive camo flickering in the twilight. The wind howled. The planet, so quiet, seemed to breathe beneath him. A faint sound, the whistle of air displaced. He turned, and darkness swallowed him. From 3 clicks away, Cole Vance exhaled slowly, chambered another round, and melted back into the hillside. He had counted 14. 1 remained. He didn't smile. There was no triumph, only the stillness of the earth, the silence of snow falling on bone. They had come expecting to conquer, but they had entered his scope, and on this battlefield, he was God, and somewhere, far above, the warlords leaned forward in their gilded thrones. This was not over. Not yet. Cole Vance had not spoken aloud in months. Words were unnecessary here. The language of survival spoke in the crunch of leaves beneath boots, the metallic slide of a bolt action, the distant echo of a dying scream. In the years since Earth fractured, he had become more shadow than man, moving from ruin to wilderness, tracing old maps etched into memory, living off the broken skeleton of a world he once swore to protect. He didn't believe in nations anymore. He didn't believe in orders. But he believed in one thing with unshakable certainty. If they set foot on his soil, they would bleed. The latest kill had been too easy. The alien had grown complacent. Assuming Earth's resistance was nothing more than a scattered remnant. Vance had watched him for hours, noting his patterns, the lazy swagger, the way his heat signature shimmered behind adaptive armor. He waited until the creature stood near a rusted antenna tower, alone, scanning the tree-line. A breath, a slow exhale, a gentle squeeze. The round traveled 2,300 meters, caught the alien beneath the eye socket, and exploded the back of its skull in a halo of violet mist. Vance packed up in less than 30 seconds. He always did. The shot was never the end, it was the invitation. Drones would be on him in minutes, scanning for residue, radiation, blood. But he left nothing. Not a print, not a stray casing. The wind covered his tracks, and the terrain concealed his retreat. Earth, for all its scars, still belonged to him. He moved through the forest like a whisper, slipping beneath fallen logs, across rivers, over stone ridges still warm from the afternoon sun. His gear was patched and worn, ghillie suit spun from local moss, gloves blackened by ash, boots taken from a fallen comrade a lifetime ago. His rifle, a heavily modified anti-material weapon, was older than the war itself. It had no name. It didn't need one. It killed what he pointed it at. Always had. The hunters had changed their methods. No more frontal patrols or arrogant broadcasts. Now they moved silently, in pairs, creeping through terrain they barely understood. He'd seen one kneeling at a stream, tasting the water, trying to extract chemical data. It hadn't realized its helmet made the ripples shimmer differently. That shimmer gave it away. Vance killed it with suppressed round of the spine. He wasn't alone, not completely. Occasionally he intercepted panic transmissions. Other survivors, civilian enclaves, rogue soldiers turned militia, but they avoided him like the plague. The stories were already spreading. Some called him a ghost. Others swore he wasn't human anymore, that he spoke to the wind and wore the bones of his enemies. He did nothing to correct the legends. Let them believe. Fear was a weapon, and in this war, he wielded every edge he could find. He watched from a hilltop as a new hunter arrived. Bigger, armored differently. Its ship landed without heat flare, stealth tech far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Vance adjusted his scope and studied it. The creature moved like it had studied him, like it knew what to expect. It didn't scan. It listened. It moved with purpose, testing terrain, checking for traps, as if it anticipated the angles from which he'd strike. This one, he knew, would not be like the others. He slid the scope down and checked wind drift. Too unpredictable for a clean shot. He'd have to draw it out, force it into a mistake. He marked his position and backed away, disappearing into a gully thick with twisted metal and half-collapsed vehicles. This would take patience. Night fell slowly, casting the landscape in hues of iron and ice. Vance made camp without fire. He consumed a ration bar in silence, listening to the wind rattle through the broken husk of an old train car. He could feel the pressure building, something shifting. The warlords were learning. The prey had started to bite, and now they wanted to see the teeth for themselves. He took out a small device no larger than a thumb, a pulse sensor salvaged from a downed scout. It blinked once, registering a signal. The new hunter was moving again, tracing his path with uncanny accuracy. Vance felt a flicker of something he hadn't in a long time. Respect. He left a trail, just enough to be noticed. A snapped branch, a disturbed pile of stones, a smear of blood from a rabbit he had skinned earlier. The hunter would think he'd gotten sloppy. That was the point. By morning, the trap was ready. Vance lay prone beneath a shattered overpass, eyes fixed on a narrow funnel between two collapsed buildings. If the hunter took the bait, it would pass through that gap at exactly 8:07 local time. At 8:06, it stopped short. Vance's heartbeat slowed. The hunter had caught the angle. Somehow, impossibly, it had sensed the kill zone. It stepped back, vanishing from the funnel. A moment later, a high-pitched burst cracked the sky, counter-sniper fire. The shot missed by inches, vaporizing a patch of earth beside him. He rolled instinctively, shifting position, adrenaline surging. The hunter had a partner, a second sniper, camouflaged and scanning from the ridge. It was the first time they'd used Earth's own tactics against him, so they had adapted. Good. Vance smiled, just barely. It had been a long time since the game felt real. He crawled deeper into the rubble, vanishing again, blood thrumming with excitement. This wasn't over. This wasn't retreat. This was evolution. And the hunt was just beginning. The hunter moved with an elegance that belied its size, each footstep calculated, each motion calibrated to mimic silence. It no longer relied on brute scans or wide sweeps. This one had studied. It moved like a soldier. More than that, a predator. Its armor flexed with each breath, adapting color and texture to its surroundings. A living ghost made for war. It had earned a name among its kind, Veldar, the apex seeker. Where others failed, Veldar succeeded. It had stalked sentients across dying moons, hunted dissidents in asteroid belts shrouded in storm clouds and magnetic chaos. But never Earth, never this. Vance knew he couldn't face this one the same way. The old tricks wouldn't work. Veldar had already avoided 2 kill zones, counter-sniped from impossible angles, and left no trace but a chilling stillness in the air. Vance had once thought himself unrivaled in patience, but this creature was testing those limits. He found himself reevaluating everything: approach, escape paths, even the way he breathed when near the edge of the scope. He didn't fear it, but he respected it in the way one respected fire after a close burn. In the days that followed, their deadly dance took on a rhythm. Vance would strike, not to kill, but to test. A ricochet here, a delayed detonation there. Veldar responded in kind, setting false trails, placing decoys that mimic heat signatures with disturbing accuracy. Their battlefield stretched across a ruined cityscape. Crumbling towers, moss-covered rubble, streets turned into canyons by time and neglect. It was chess played with shrapnel and silence. One evening, as dusk turned concrete gold, Vance watched through a shattered window 3 stories up. A glint caught his eye, a fragment of movement at the corner of a rooftop across the boulevard. He froze. There, a shift in the light that didn't belong. He didn't move to fire. Instead, he inhaled slowly and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. A shape, subtle and impossibly patient, began to inch forward. Veldar was tracing his position, committing to an approach that would have fooled anyone else. Vance allowed it. He stayed limp, heartbeat low, counting the seconds. He had planted nothing in that room, no traps, no backup exit. But he had known Veldar would come. At precisely 23 minutes in, the floor beneath Vance's position gave a soft groan. Dust stirred. Veldar pounced. But Vance was already gone, slipped through a vertical shaft in the wall, and vanished into the lower levels. A faint click echoed as a counterweight disengaged. The entire structure above imploded in silence, drawn down by charges lacing the wall struts. Not enough to kill Veldar, but enough to bury the predator under 5 tons of steel and stone. Vance didn't wait to confirm. He moved, fast and quiet, through forgotten subways, past graffiti older than the invasion. He knew better than to assume the kill, but it would buy time. Above, smoke curled into sky, drawing a lazy spiral over the ruin. The moment was temporary. The silence wouldn't last. He returned to a hideout he hadn't used in weeks, an old hydro substation fortified with repurposed drones and steel-plated doors. Inside, maps covered the walls, annotated with patterns of movement, sightings, satellite wreckage. He reviewed the footage, rewound drone feeds, analyzed the angle Veldar had taken. Each frame told him something new. The hunter wasn't just stalking him. It was learning him. He scrubbed the sequence, paused, enhanced the frame. There, a signal beacon, faint and embedded into Veldar's spine. A tracker, but not for communication, for observation. Someone else was watching. The thought twisted in his gut like wire. The Warlord hadn't just sent Veldar to kill him. They'd sent him to study him. This was a test, a blueprint for how to kill humans, how to unravel the last threat Earth posed. If Veldar succeeded, they wouldn't send more hunters. They'd send armies. That night, Vance didn't sleep. He dismantled his rifle and cleaned it with slow, precise hands, each motion guided by ritual more than need. He whispered numbers to himself, distances, wind coefficients, previous kill ranges. Anchors. Things that kept the mind steady when everything else felt like glass underfoot. By dawn, he made his decision. He would draw Veldar into the final place, a place he'd reserved for the worst-case scenario. He packed only what he needed: rifle, 3 magazines, a pistol with 2 mags, a knife, a single thermal charge. The rest he left behind. There would be no second engagement. This had to end, one way or another. The place he chose was an old launch complex, buried in what had once been a forest reserve. It was open terrain, but riddled with channels, broken elevators, and tower husks. A sniper's nightmare, but also a hunter's blind spot. With enough elevation and timing, he could manipulate sight lines to his advantage. He didn't plan to ambush Veldar. He planned to be seen. He wanted the hunter to know he was there. And Veldar came. At first, just a sound, a pressure shift, the subtle tick of gravel moved by weightless steps. Then the form, tall, almost regal, its armor glistening with dust and debris from collapse. It had survived. Of course it had. Vance didn't raise his rifle. Instead, he stood. Veldar paused at the far end of the launch bay, tilted its head. Vance held the knife in one hand, rifle slung behind his back. Challenge. The alien stepped forward, slow and deliberate. It understood. They moved in arcs, closing the space in measured passes. No fire, no tricks, just breath and footfall. Vance's fingers trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. When the first blow came, it was like lightning, Veldar's blade catching the air where Vance's ribs had been. He twisted away, slashed upward, metal shrieking across armor. The next seconds were blur, parries, sparks, grunts of effort. A knife fight with a creature that shouldn't have known how to brawl like a human, and yet did. Vance felt the pain bloom in his side, but he ignored it, driving forward, slamming the charge into Veldar's chest. The alien reacted too late. The device clicked, locking in place. Vance threw himself backward just as the world went white. When the smoke cleared, silence reigned. In the center of the bay, Veldar lay still, armor cracked open, the light in its ocular lens flickering. Vance knelt beside it, breathing shallow, blood dark on his shirt. The hunter's fingers twitched, reaching toward him, not an attack, but as if to understand. He watched the light fade, and then he was alone again. He didn't smile. He didn't mourn. He just walked toward the edge of the ruins, knowing this wouldn't be the last. High above Earth, in the cold corridors of the Warlords' dreadnought, silence blanketed the observation chamber. Dozens of eyes, organic, augmented, and artificial, stared at the final moments of the Apex Seeker's transmission, played over and over. The explosion, the aftermath, the slumped corpse of Veldar, the human standing over it, injured but upright, a silhouette cut from blood and ash. The Warlords had known failure before. They had lost fleets, squandered legions, rewritten entire histories to hide their embarrassments. But this was different. This was a wound to their myth. Not only had a human bested their finest, he had done so alone, without satellites, without support, without even a functioning nation behind him. A single sniper had turned their best into ash. And he was still alive. Dissent grew. Some called for full invasion. Others, more cautious, argued it was too soon. Earth had proven unpredictable. The question was no longer about conquest. It was about containment and fear. Cole Vance didn't know any of this. He had no interest in their politics, no care for their deliberations. All he knew was that the quiet had returned, and that meant they were thinking. He'd felt this before after a firefight, when the enemy pulled back, not in surrender, but to regroup. He had time, but not much. He patched himself up in a maintenance tunnel beneath the old launch complex, working in the dim flicker of failing lights. The wound in his side was deep but clean. Veldar had fought with precision. Even in death, it had earned Vance's respect. There was something noble in it, something almost human. Days passed. He moved again, never staying in one place more than a night. He'd survived long enough to know routine was a death sentence. The land shifted beneath him, seasons changing in subtle ways. The trees spoke in rustling tones. The rivers ran colder. Life, such as it was, carried on. Sometimes he came across signs of others. Faint radio bursts, coded messages, symbols scratched into stone. Not many humans were left, but they were out there, watching, listening. A resistance not built from armies, but from fragments, snipers, saboteurs, survivors. People who had seen the impossible and decided to keep breathing anyway. They were beginning to whisper his name. He didn't encourage it. He didn't want it. But he knew the power of myth. If it kept someone from giving up, if it made the Warlords hesitate, then let the myth grow. He returned to the high ridge above the Black Basin, where the air was thin and the stars looked close enough to touch. His scope scanned the skies every evening, looking not for prey, but for signs of movement, reflections of orbital craft, patterns of light that didn't match stars. He found one, just a glint, moving fast against the horizon. A small vessel, not war grade, a scout. He tracked it for 3 days, watched it land just outside a crater where the land had swallowed half a city. A single life form disembarked, smaller than the hunters, less armored, civilian class, but not unarmed. Curious, he observed from the edge of a ruined overpass, rifle steady but finger off the trigger. The visitor moved with care, scanning debris, taking readings. It wasn't a warrior. It was a scientist, or something close. On the 4th day, it left a package. Not a weapon. A case, sealed, marked in old earth glyphs. Vance was scrawled in block letters. No ambush followed. No attack, just the wind. He approached it only after hours had passed. Inside was a data drive, a medkit, and a sealed note written in English. The handwriting was shaky, but human. We've seen what you're doing. You're not alone. Signal us if you want to fight together. If not, keep doing what you do. We'll watch. We'll learn. Vance stood for a long time, reading the words over and over. He didn't signal them. Not yet. But he didn't throw the drive away either. Night fell, quiet and deep. He sat beneath the rusted bones of an old radio tower, listening to the static hum of the damaged transmitter. His rifle lay across his knees, barrel still warm from cleaning. The stars above blinked, vast and endless, as if waiting. He thought of Veldar, of the ones who would come next. They would be smarter, deadlier, but they would still bleed. He was no longer just surviving. He was preparing. In the darkness, the static cracked just once, a sound like breath. Vance looked up and smiled just a little.